Okay, I think I'm ready to share this conversation with you. And I'll be honest, I have batted it around for months and I've been dragging my feet, putting my head in the sand a little bit, trying to deny this dialogue. The problem is that we're running out of time. And if I'm going to be of value to anybody who stumbles across this video, I kind of have to bring it to you now-ish. And so with that said, you'll have to forgive me. There may be an energy of uncomfortableness because I'm a little uncomfortable with the subject. So that's all very true. And I will also say that these sort of predictions are as old as time. They have been coming through in the, dating all the way back to the consciousness of man. And for the most part, they don't happen. There have been events like, plagues and catastrophic wars and such, which have harmed the lives of hundreds of millions of people. So there have been apocalyptic type events. But for the most part, there have been far more predictions of these sort of events than actual occurrences. So if you can take comfort in any thought, let it be that. If what I'm sharing with you, you don't desire. Some people actually are looking forward to this event like you wouldn't believe. But most people are a little bit anxious around it. And I kind of fall in, I'm on both sides. I oscillate between those two poles, if you will. So with that said, today's discussion is going to have three main sections. The first will explore the metaphysical framework. The second will draw a bridge using current events to understand a little of what's actually already unfolded. And then the third will be the spiritual lesson as well as practical advice. All right, so the first section is the metaphysical. You need to hold three concepts for this video to make sense. The first is that of timelines. The second is that of inflection points. And then the third is that of the ascension. And so with regards to timelines, it's a very complex subject. All you have to understand is there's a version of you that's actually operating in another dimension, if you will, or another timeline with a number of variations, right? So there could be 10 Allans, for example, or 7 Allans. And they're all moving through in their own way, growing, experiencing, so on and so forth, right? Those timelines operate for the individual. They operate at the collective level, and they also operate at the planetary sphere. So for example, right now Earth has 7 timelines. And part of the reason why predictions are so complex is you could get a premonition of what's about to happen on the planet. But if that premonition occurs on another timeline, you may have no awareness of it. There's a primary version of you, like this version of me speaking to you now could have a premonition that's happening on a different timeline that I'm actually experiencing on that timeline. But if I share it with you on this timeline and it's occurring on that timeline, then it would feel as if it was just a false prediction. All right, so keep that concept in mind as best you can. The next concept to share is that of inflection points. And we think that the human mind is so complex. We're always analyzing and thinking and ruminating. What did I do? What did I say? What could I have done differently? Where do I go from here? And all of that is of value, but it's really just a lot of noise. It's a lot of static. And yet, every so often in your life, you reach a point and you make a notable decision, and it takes you in a different direction. Okay, that's known as an inflection point. Do you get married, or do you run off to New York and pursue dance? Do you have this child, or are you really not ready to be a parent? Do you make that huge investment decision, or are you not going to risk your savings? Those various inflection points are actually being influenced from above, right? Whether it's your higher self, spirit guides, divine intention, it's almost like a little whisper. Something tells you what path you have to, and everybody around you could be like, why is she doing that? I don't understand. And yet there's something in your psyche, in your consciousness that's saying, no, this is what I need to do. I've made that decision, right? And sometimes you have an instinct around something and you get so much pressure from others that your resolve is weakened and you don't listen to that whisper. You don't hear it. But that's the concept of an inflection point. Before you arrived, your incarnation had everything planned out as it related to your date of birth, your day of death, and all the inflection points along the way. Okay? Some of them can still be overridden, but in general, the major moments of your life have been planned. Those inflection points, just like timelines, operate at the individual level, but also for the planet itself. And that leads me to the third metaphysical element, which is the ascension. All you have to understand with the ascension is that the vibration of the planet is accelerating. All right? Another way to put that is the consciousness or the speed by which the planet is operating is now moving through to its next level. That inflection point at the planetary sphere kicked off about a decade ago or so and is accelerating. The choice has been made. The planet is ascending. The incarnates here on the planet will need to match the vibration if they intend to ascend with it. You can kind of think of the planet as the body and the people, the incarnates, as the nervous system. If the nervous system is not operating at the same level as the body, then the nervous system, either the body dies, which isn't happening here, or the nervous system has to go through a renewal process, so to speak. The nervous system has to catch up. Okay? And if there's parts of the nervous system which are not operating well, those parts won't be able to remain. It's kind of the fundamental part of it. And so to put it all together, timelines, inflection points, and the ascension of the planet, right? That's the metaphysical framework for today's discussion. And don't worry if you don't understand it fully. You just have to have a loose grasp of this. Some of you would have been studying this probably years before because it was interesting. But even if it's relatively new to you, just keep those concepts in mind as best as you can. And it will help as the conversation goes to the next few stages. So the next part of this discussion is the bridge of planetary events. And so we all know about a year and a half ago or so, a virus started to circulate throughout the planet. And for the longest time, you weren't allowed to say, it's kind of weird, right? It seemed odd that social media would be censoring these sort of discussions. But for the longest time, you weren't allowed to say that maybe it came out of a lab, right? Like that discussion was taboo, for example. And interestingly enough, my blind just slammed shut. Interestingly enough, I was just watching that video again. So I filmed that a few weeks ago. And when I'm off track, Spirit comes through and kind of smacks me in the head a little bit. So that part of the conversation wasn't meant to be. The bridge that I was drawing, which was bringing in current events into the discussion, was probably going to be more of a distraction than anything. And I know that to be the case because it was a beautiful sunny day. There was no breeze even. And my storm shutters, which are pretty heavy ones, totally interrupted my train of thought. And when I came back to try to continue the conversation, I wasn't able to. I had brain fog. I was spaced out for the day. And then life carried me away. And now weeks later, late at night here, I'm actually inclined to finish this video. And so a lot has actually transpired, and I'm in a much better vibrational space. And you can probably detect a difference. I'm actually much more at ease with the conversation. The conversation is the same, but the feelings that I have towards it have evolved. And so it's brought me into a more beautiful space. And so I'm better equipped actually to communicate what I feel is coming. The difference is that I have learned that I will not be discussing that bridge, which was the current event piece, and you'll just have to forgive me. We are going to jump from the metaphysical right into the spiritual. And I will cover the spiritual from both a lessons or an understanding standpoint, as well as some practical advice around it. And that is, if you believe the elements of this conversation and believe that the possibility of what it is that I'm sharing coming true, then you can also feel your way into some of the practical advice. And if it doesn't resonate with you, or perhaps it does resonate but you don't decide or feel the need to do anything around it, that's all okay as well. All right? And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, these messages have come to me, and so I feel them, but I feel an inclination to share them with you. From that point on, you get to choose whatever feels right. You just allow that to carry you forward. All right, so in the context of the spiritual, I will say that the timelines that I mentioned, this concept that there's multiple iterations unfolding, and that Earth has 7 timelines, from what I have been told, all 7 timelines are now predicting notable disruption. Okay, and when I speak of disruption, I speak of the systems that we've grown most accustomed to: food supply, the medical system, the financial system. All of these on all 7 timelines are currently predicting varying degrees of disruption. And those disruptions would carry forth for varying durations. Okay? I don't know exactly which timeline this version of us winds up on, and I don't know the severity of it, but I do know that even the most mild of disruptions is significant enough to impair access to the food supply the way we're accustomed to accessing it, which is just walking into a store and buying whatever we want whenever we want it. Okay? I will also share that in the concept of an inflection point, there has been a vibration emanated, a divine message, if you will, that has been emanated now for quite some time, that has been encouraging those who can hear it not to participate in the medical experiment currently underway, masquerading as in your best interest to protect you from an illness that started circulating earlier last year. Okay? This, I call it a whisper. It's really it's more of a knowing or a feeling or an intuition. Maybe you saw other people participating in this medical experiment and something didn't feel right about their experience. Perhaps you had dreams even that led you down a path. Or maybe somehow, some way, for whatever reason, something deep within you just said, don't do it. There's alternatives. You're not in a high-risk group. You can take care of yourself in other ways. You don't trust it. It's too new. Something resonated within your intuition that guided you away from participation in this medical experiment. And that is that your vibration was aligned, that your incarnation was enough on track that you could hear this divine whisper. This moment of either participating or not participating is an inflection point. It's one of those moments of your life where you can either go down one path or down another path. And everybody who participated had an opportunity to change their mind after their first initial participation. Some went in once and said, I'm not doing that again. Others went in twice and are now actively waiting for potentially to participate for a 3rd or 4th or 5th time, whatever it takes. There is a bifurcation, a separation of consciousness. There are those that can hear the whisper who have turned towards a higher vibrational space. And there are those, oftentimes governed by fear or selfish intention, that have moved away from the whisper. Their inflection point has carried them into a lower vibrational space. They're often already in a lower vibrational space, and it prevented them from hearing this whisper. And unfortunately, there are many that are in between that are either too young to have made this decision, or in many cases, they could hear that whisper. Something told them that maybe a moment of prudence would serve them well. But there was too much pressure, and their human mind became too dominant, and they got stuck in the news cycle, and everything coming at them in every which way within the practical human realm was telling them to override that intuition and to participate in this medical experiment. Whatever the explanation, participation was an inflection point that carried you down potentially potentially a difficult path. Okay, I'm being diplomatic. All right, so we know that the timelines, or I believe that the timelines are showing notable disruption. And I believe that participating in this medical experiment that is now underway, that has ensnarled at this point about a quarter of the world's population, is going to prove to be an inflection point which will create enough illness and or death in both the near and longer term that will take enough incarnates off of this planetary sphere that will be the reason for the disruptions that I spoke of a moment earlier. Okay? The third piece of this puzzle is that the planet is ascending. Many incarnates here, and there are some absolutely beautiful beings with an amazing vibration who have an incredible devotion to service and are operating out of love and compassion and desire to support humanity. There are enough of those incarnates here that they are supportive of the planetary vibration, and the planet itself is moving to its next level of consciousness. The planet is going through an inflection point of its own, and it is moving into an ascended state. The incarnates here, whether they've participated in this medical experiment or not, although it is a separating line, the incarnates here will have to move forward with the planetary vibration. And many of you have been doing just that because you have been actively working on yourself. You have been devoted to your spiritual path. You have been feeling the call to operate out of your heart and not to do the things that you don't enjoy doing, not to operate from a space of fear, not to descend down into the lowest depths of humanity, but rather to move in the other direction. And that's incredibly important because to move forward with an ascended planet, you have to match that vibration. The best and easiest way to ensure that your vibration moves forward is simply to connect with a being who has a higher vibration. By connecting to an ascended being, that vibration will pull you forward. And the easiest way to do so is simply to call for help. Call for help. Speak out loud. It doesn't matter who it is that you're calling to. It can be God, it can be the infinite creator, it can be Mother Mary or Jesus or one consciousness or a divine intention, Archangel Michael. It really, 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 really doesn't matter. In your mind, if the intention is to connect with a being outside of your space who is otherwise of a higher ascended state that can pull you forward, that's all it's going to take. And so what's going to end up happening on the planetary sphere, as I believe it to be, is that enough of the people who have participated in this medical experiment, many of them have already fallen quite ill. And many of those, unfortunately, have already departed. It is just beginning. And so it's my belief that in the months or years, and I think it's closer to months than years, the choice that has been made for those that decided to participate in this medical experiment will end up suffering as a consequence. And as they begin to suffer, they will start to call for help. And as those who love them and support them and desire to care for them are affected by their illness, they too, on behalf of loved ones or on their own behalf, will likewise begin to call for help. At some point, those calls will get loud enough. And at some point, help will arrive. When help arrives, everything as we know it will turn the corner and move into the most beautiful space. As the world that we've come to know with its heaviness and its enslavement, various forms, will have come to a conclusion, and a new earth will be born. And those inhabitants that have been successful in listening to the whisper, calling for help, and raising their vibration throughout this process, they will be the ones, most likely, not all of them, some of them will get caught up unfortunately, but they will be the ones that are most likely to participate in the rebuilding of the new planet. And that new planet it offers much to look forward to. It offers great hope. Okay, so this is the general context or conversation around the spiritual. And this is why I was uncomfortable when I was recording it a few weeks ago. It's a heavy discussion. And I know many of you will be listening to this and say, I didn't have a choice, it was my job, or I didn't know it was a problem, or I trusted my doctor. And there will be others that will be listening to this and be like, I know, I knew it. I could hear that whisper that he's speaking of. I felt that intuition. Or I felt the intuition and maybe I regret overriding it. Or of course, Allan's a little bit off his rocker. He's not making any sense. Whatever it is that comes up for you, whatever it is, and wherever you are in your journey, the practical advice that I'm giving you at this moment is on a few different levels. Take care of some important stuff. So for starters, if you have any dental work that needs to be done, do it now. If you have any eye care, right, needing new lenses or new glasses, things like that, just get it done. Don't delay. Of course, if you have any medical procedures that you've been dragging your feet on, take care of all of these things. Access to the resources that would be necessary to complete them may be scarce or dear. Right? They may be really unavailable. I would also say, if there are foods that you enjoy and they're non-perishable, like organic soups, for example, I have some beautiful ones that I buy in cans just recently. If there are foods like that you'll likely eat anyways, stock up on them. Like really, really stock up on them, knowing that they won't go to waste. It may take you a few years to get to them, but put them in your pantry. Put a lot of foods in your pantry. The logic just being that if what I'm saying comes true, you'll be that much more capable to care for yourself through the dark months that follow. If what I'm saying doesn't come true, you'll either be able to consume these foods yourself or perhaps at some point choose to donate them to those less fortunate. Either way, see it as a nice thing to do for either yourself or for others. Right? This part of the conversation actually goes on for quite a while. I've spent the better part of 5 weeks, 6 weeks now, preparing for what I perceive to be forthcoming. And so I don't want you to have any urgency or any fear per se, but just keep this in mind as you're going about some of you are already many steps ahead of me. But for those of you that are unsure of where to go from here, I would say just envision a world where the most common resources are just unavailable for a period of time, perhaps 6 or 8 months. And do what you can to bridge the divide. Do what you can to protect yourself from that sort of disruption. Okay, that's my advice to you. And so I'm going to leave it here today for this conversation. And I'm going to do my best to create follow-up videos. I don't have a ton of time right now. And it's my belief that this time is best spent preparing, but that's just me. This information has been brought to me. It wasn't brought to me to share with you per se. It's just something that I'm choosing to do here. And I genuinely, truly believe that regardless of what happens, call for help. Encourage your friends and family to call for help. Those who understand this message will know to do so instinctively. Those who are resistant to it, let them be. There's a separation in consciousness now. Help those who are willing to be helped, and care for yourself at the same time. All right, everyone. In love and light, we just got to get through this next stretch and look forward to the hopeful days that will follow.